Hello and welcome to This Really Happened, a place where unbelievable, heart-touching true stories come to life. Sometimes surprising, sometimes bittersweet, always real. Grab a drink and settle in. We're about to begin. Mid-March evening was approaching. The leaden sky shed snow mixed with rain. Underfoot, the muddy slush turned to mire, causing passers-by to constantly lose their balance. Mrs. Eleanor Vance stepped carefully, choosing the spot for each step attentively. All she needed, on top of her existing troubles, was to slip on this mess and hurt something. Hospital walls had become almost familiar as it was. What could she do? Age was taking its toll, and the doctor's verdict was not encouraging. Turning around, the elderly woman saw a smiling face. Standing before her was a tall, beautiful girl with a mass of red hair. Of course, Mrs. Eleanor Vance recognized her, although perhaps she no longer used her former surname, Baker, her former student. 3 years ago, Mrs. Eleanor Vance had graduated this class and retired. They stood for a bit, exchanging news. The former teacher was always pleased to hear about the successes of her students. Here was Lydia, it turned out, mastering sciences at the finance and economics faculty and even working part-time. A smart girl, truly excellent. They parted ways. Lydia hurried on to her urgent business, while Mrs. Eleanor Vance headed to the store. The potatoes were running out, and fresh bread wouldn't hurt. She would take a little of everything. How much does one person need? Before, like all her colleagues and friends, Mrs. Eleanor Vance tormented herself with diets. But now she could well afford an extra bun or a candy, but the joy of food had gone somewhere. And generally, the very flow of life had changed. Headaches became her companions almost immediately after retirement. The farewell party was solemn at a table in the school cafeteria. Words of gratitude were spoken. Each colleague recalled something good. It was a little awkward, but touchingly moving. At the time of her departure, Mrs. Eleanor Vance was only 60. It was scary to leave the collective, to leave the school where she had taught history for nearly 40 years. But what could she do? The children had changed. It was harder and harder to find common ground with them. In short, Mrs. Eleanor Vance didn't wait for them to show her the door. Realizing that things were heading that way, she wrote the application herself. For a long time, the newly minted pensioner got used to the new reality. At first, she would wake up at 7 in the morning and mechanically get ready for work. Only then would she remember that there was nowhere to go anymore. She would lie down again, but sleep wouldn't return. Then Mrs. Eleanor Vance would go to the window and watch the people. Adults hurried about their business, children ran to school, and she felt thrown out of this flow, finding herself somewhere on the sidelines of life. "Don't talk nonsense," her old friend Susan snapped at her confessions. "Life only begins in retirement. Enjoy your well-deserved rest." Susan, who had retired a couple of years earlier, couldn't understand Mrs. Eleanor Vance. After all, she had a husband, adult children, and most importantly, grandchildren, 5-year-old twins, Tom and Daisy. Their parents worked, and the grandparents helped raise the little ones. Susan had someone to live for, someone to care for. How could she understand Mrs. Eleanor Vance? But with her own, somehow it didn't work out. However much she was treated, whatever doctors she consulted. Her husband, Dr. Robert Vance, being the chief physician of the local regional clinic, could arrange a consultation with any medical luminary. He had connections. But nothing helped. It was not destined for the woman to become a mother, neither for her nor for her husband. How many children there are in the world, unwanted by their own parents. Mrs. Eleanor Vance had seen plenty of those during her years at school. Seemingly a prosperous family, the child dressed and shod like a doll. And yet you could see that they lacked parental care and attention. Mrs. Eleanor Vance and her husband would have been happy to raise Daniel, make him happy, show him the world, raise a kind, good person. But the stork never came to their house. For a long time, Mrs. Eleanor Vance learned to live with the thought that she would not become a mother. She didn't give up immediately. She fought to the end until her health began to fail. Then, at the first alarming signals, her friend Susan, she had the full set, but didn't fully appreciate her happiness, as is often the case with happy people. She took the gift from heaven for granted, and even complained to Mrs. Eleanor Vance periodically about her lazy son or her fashion-conscious daughter. And to friends with children, if they wanted to, they'd go on a trip. If they wanted to, they'd lie around all day watching TV after a hard work week. No lessons, no children's clinics, no endless clubs and sections. And still, Mrs. Eleanor Vance suffered. She wanted to give love and affection to a loved one who needed it. And lonely old age was frightening. It would come someday, and there would be no one to even bring her a glass of water. And then came the realization that everyone has their own destiny. Mrs. Eleanor Vance's was like this. Not the worst, to be honest. She had a loving husband, financial security, a job she loved. It was to her job that the woman gave all her heart and soul. There were always plenty of children at school who needed her help. Seeing such children, she tried to notice their problems, support them in difficult situations. Some, besides her, had no one else to rely on in this life at all, and they were so vulnerable, still so defenseless. The stories of her students still surfaced in Mrs. Eleanor Vance's memory in the smallest details. Here, for example, Chris Smith. Everyone had written him off. The principal himself predicted the boy would end up in prison. Teachers refused to hold lessons if he was in the classroom. Chris was bullied from all sides, and all he needed was a heart-to-heart talk with someone who would understand, who would pity him. Mrs. Eleanor Vance turned out to be such a person. Chris had problems at home. His father drank, lashed out at the children, beat his wife. Mrs. Eleanor Vance realized that in such a family, Chris Smith would perish. She used all her connections and got the difficult but very intelligent boy into a cadet school. Boarding, strict discipline, all this did its job. Now Chris, who was considered a future criminal at school, holds a leadership position in the police, is married, happy, and quite prosperous. And he still doesn't forget to call his favourite teacher, visits her to thank her once again for her role in his fate. Or Anna Miller, a quiet, withdrawn girl who couldn't even open her mouth at the blackboard. She got weak C grades. They were given for her quiet, problem-free behaviour. Little Anna had a degree of cerebral palsy. She stood out from her peers, walked a little awkwardly. Her legs would periodically cramp. Mrs. Eleanor Vance felt sorry for Anna, and she started paying attention to her. One day they got talking, and it turned out that Anna was a person of unusual depth and understanding for her age, a little sage. Anna confided her secret to Mrs. Eleanor Vance. Secretly, from everyone, she wrote poetry but didn't show it to anyone. She was shy. Mrs. Eleanor Vance helped Anna believe in herself and also introduced her to local poets. They appreciated the girl's talent, took her under their wing. Now Anna is the author of several books and the head of a literary club at a local university. She found herself and no longer seems like that quiet, withdrawn girl. Anna is a real star. There were such happy stories in Mrs. Eleanor Vance's life, but she didn't always succeed in helping. Here's Kathy, for example, Kathy Adams, a thin, tall girl with long hair the colour of ripe rye, a true Russian beauty, fair skin, bottomless blue eyes, regular, pleasant facial features. Kathy. This little girl had serious family problems. Her father either died or ran away many years ago. Kathy didn't remember him. Her mother had since dreamed of settling her personal life. She was a young, striking woman, changing boyfriends like gloves. And it would be fine if she just changed them. She followed them all over the country, dragging the child with her. Kathy came to Mrs. Eleanor Vance's school in the 8th grade. She never stayed longer than a year and a half, all because of her mother's craving for change of place. Her mother worked as a hairdresser, a profession that allowed her to easily find work in any city, or work from home, which she often did. Kathy had to move to this town because of her mother's new suitor, yet another stepfather. He was a long-haul truck driver, met Kathy's mother in a bar and took her home with him. Mrs. Eleanor Vance immediately noticed that Kathy had a bad life at home. She had a sharp eye. She had seen such children, felt their trouble. She started looking more closely. Kathy kept to herself. Nobody bullied her, but she didn't really socialize with anyone either. She avoided talking to the girls, tried not to participate in school-wide events. The girl stayed late at school. She sat in the library, reading, doing homework, clearly delaying her return home. One day, Mrs. Eleanor Vance stayed late at school. A parent-teacher meeting had dragged on. When they left, it was already dark. In the schoolyard, Mrs. Eleanor Vance noticed a lone, hunched figure on a park bench. Sensing that the person was in trouble, she approached closer. Kathy was sitting on the bench in the school garden. Seeing Mrs. Eleanor Vance, she was initially flustered, embarrassed. The teacher managed to get her to talk. She understood what the girl needed to hear and feel. She saw she lacked the participation and sympathy of an adult, strong person. Kathy initially said little. She was shy. Then she slowly opened up, told her about her life. The experienced teacher learned a lot. Her mother, it turned out, had more than once blamed her daughter for her failures in her personal life, because, she said, it was hard to find a good man with a child. And Kathy's mother had different men. There were indifferent ones who didn't notice the girl at all. There were also aggressive, irritable ones. Her current stepfather constantly picked on Kathy. Everything she did was wrong. He also yelled at her mother, sometimes even laid hands on her, especially when he was drinking. Mrs. Eleanor Vance found out a terrible thing. Kathy. She didn't want to go home. That's why she stayed late at the library. And when it was warm, she would wander the streets until night, or sit somewhere until the very last moment, and only then return to the apartment. There was nowhere else to go. With an aggressive man and a perpetually irritated mother, Kathy felt that no one in the family needed her, that she was only in the way, and everyone would be better off without her. The girl opened her soul to the teacher, and tears streamed down her cheeks. Mrs. Eleanor Vance hugged Kathy, said something calming, and was angry at Kathy's mother. This woman didn't appreciate the gift of fate at all. Such a wonderful girl, beautiful, sensitive, capable. She didn't study very well, though, but it was no wonder. When was she supposed to do her homework if she tried to get home by the time everyone was already asleep, so as not to disturb them? That's what she learned from her mother. Not to provoke rudeness or even punishment. Mrs. Eleanor Vance became even more attentive to Kathy. A warm, trusting relationship developed between them. Sometimes after school the girl would go to the teacher's house. It was quiet and peaceful there. She could prepare for lessons. Kathy even improved her grades. Dr. Robert Vance, Mrs. Eleanor Vance's husband, was shocked. He initiated an inspection by the guardianship authorities. He thought maybe at least this authority would hold the irresponsible adults accountable, force them to care for the child. But the inspection concluded that the family was prosperous. The apartment was renovated. The child had her own sleeping place. The refrigerator was full of food. Mrs. Eleanor Vance choked on this lie, detached from the sad reality. But what could it be? Kathy didn't write poetry. She couldn't sing. She didn't want to dance. Needlework didn't appeal to her. Mrs. Eleanor Vance just couldn't find what would help Kathy persevere. The girl needed strength to grow up a normal person, to become strong, independent. Kathy transformed from an awkward girl into a pretty young woman. She still had no friends among her classmates, but she started socializing with guys from a nearby college. Mrs. Eleanor Vance closely monitored the student. She was afraid that life circumstances would push her onto a slippery slope. She talked a lot with the girl, told her about the dangers awaiting teenagers. Essentially, she was doing her mother's job. Kathy, she would nod, promising not to do anything foolish, and each time she thanked Mrs. Eleanor Vance for her involvement. "You do more for me than my mother," Kathy would sometimes say. "Nonsense," Mrs. Eleanor Vance objected. "Your mother feeds you, gives you drink, clothes you, and you warm my heart." Mrs. Eleanor Vance saw that Kathy was drawn to her, listened to her opinion, and yet she worried about her very much. You never know? Kathy was at such a difficult and dangerous age, and her only significant adult was her history teacher. It shouldn't be like that. And then Kathy disappeared. The evening before, she visited Mrs. Eleanor Vance. The teacher was happy, invited her to the table. The girl had dinner, they talked a lot, laughed. Nothing foreshadowed trouble. And only before leaving, Kathy suddenly handed Mrs. Eleanor Vance a locket. Inexpensive, but pretty, silver-plated costume jewellery. "This is for you." "Thank you very much, it's a lovely thing, but there's no holiday, is there?" "Take it anyway." "Thank you, Kathy." Kathy left, and only then did Mrs. Eleanor Vance realize that the locket opened. Inside was Kathy's photograph. The photo was clearly recent. The girl smiled cheerfully, looking like a model, a beauty. Mrs. Eleanor Vance was happy with the gift. She perceived it as a sign of attention, of care. The teacher, a sensitive, delicate girl. A grateful teenager is a rarity these days. And yet this gesture immediately seemed strange and even alarming to Mrs. Eleanor Vance. The next day, Kathy was gone. She didn't appear at school, nor was she at home. Her mother late at night. But this time it was clear that something extraordinary had happened. Kathy, as a minor, was immediately searched for. No joke. A 16-year-old teenager had disappeared. Missing person posters were put up around town. There were many theories. They also talked about her being a victim of a visiting criminal. But Mrs. Eleanor Vance was sure Kathy had simply run away, perhaps not alone. The girl knew yesterday that she would leave, and the locket with the photo was a farewell gift. Mrs. Eleanor Vance told the investigator about this detail, but he didn't take her words into account. He brushed them aside. The leading theory was kidnapping. Kathy was never found. Her mother, after a bout, met a new boyfriend and went off with him to parts unknown. She, like Mrs. Eleanor Vance, was sure. Her daughter was alive. She had just run away somewhere because she didn't want to study, and they made her at home. She found a boyfriend and was enjoying life, youth, and freedom. Mrs. Eleanor Vance never heard about her student again, although she tried several times to find out her fate. That very locket remained as a keepsake. It was kept in a jewellery box. Sometimes Mrs. Eleanor Vance would take it out, open it, and gaze at Cathy's cheerful, beautiful face. Where was this girl now, who was no longer a girl, but a grown woman? How had her fate turned out? For some reason it seemed that such a flight could not end well. Mrs. Eleanor Vance blamed herself for not stopping Cathy that evening, for not asking her more about her plans. After all, that unexpected gift had alarmed her. But the girl, she had looked quite happy then. Yes, truly happy. It was strange, but reassuring. Mrs. Eleanor Vance thought that perhaps the girl's life had finally improved, because a joyful light shone in her eyes. And look how it all turned out. "You can't save everyone," Robert reassured his wife. He saw how she suffered from guilt. "I certainly know things like this happen in the hospital. Trouble, it just happens. Even if you did everything to prevent it, there's nothing you can do about it." Mrs. Eleanor Vance understood. Her husband was right, but she still tormented herself with thoughts of Cathy. The worst thing was the uncertainty. She wanted so much to believe that things had turned out well for this girl. But that was self-deception. What good could happen to a runaway teenager, unwanted by her parents? Robert, her beloved husband, best friend, closest person, so smart and serious, strict and responsible at work, tender and kind with her, with Mrs. Eleanor Vance. They had been together since they were 20. They met at an amusement park as students, and they never parted until death separated them 7 years ago. Robert held a leadership position, chief physician of the regional hospital. It was a stressful, responsible job. He was loved and respected for his professionalism. Robert loved his work, and Mrs. Eleanor Vance understood him. She felt the same way about her own work. And so Robert passed away right at his workplace from a sudden heart attack. So many doctors were nearby, and they couldn't save him. "Trouble just happens," Robert had once said, and so it happened, trouble. Mrs. Eleanor Vance fell into apathy. Perhaps only work pulled her out then. At school, whether you wanted to or not, you had to keep it together. Students and colleagues distracted her, gradually bringing her back to life. And then retirement, and she felt completely alone and unwanted. She hadn't imagined this time like that. They would travel, they had the money. Her husband was serious, responsible, and had opened a savings account long ago. Money was accumulating there for their happy old age. Only Mrs. Eleanor Vance's old age turned out not to be so happy. 2 years after retirement passed in a mode of adapting to a new life. No notebooks, no school bells, no answers, no meetings in the principal's office, no New Year's parties and fun school holidays. Mrs. Eleanor Vance thought about a darsha, about working the land. But she realized in time that she couldn't handle a plot alone. If only Robert were here, that would be different. But the woman arranged a real conservatory in the living room. Flowers stood not only on the windowsill, they were everywhere. Mrs. Eleanor Vance's personal home garden. There were even 2 birch trees in tubs. The woman liked caring for the plants. After all, like children, they also need care, attention, and love. Mrs. Eleanor Vance stopped to catch her breath. Such walks were already difficult for her. The insidious illness was making itself known. And what next? The doctors had made it clear there were no miracles. Mrs. Eleanor Vance's condition would only worsen. How hard it was at such a moment not to have family and loved ones nearby. Her head had ached before, so at first Mrs. Eleanor Vance didn't pay attention to the alarming symptoms. Her head would ache, she'd take a pill, and everything would be fine. Then dizziness and nausea were added. Migraines became daily. Then the elderly woman went to the hospital. They prescribed all the procedures for her: tests, ultrasound, MRI. The verdict sounded like a bolt from the blue. The tumour was inoperable, rapidly progressing. Nothing could be done. The only thing the doctors could do was relieve the pain. "And how much time do I have?" the woman asked, looking the doctor in the eye. "Tell me honestly. I have no one. I need to finish my affairs myself, you understand? I need to know how much time I have." "Well, it's hard to say how the illness will behave. I think a minimum of a year. Maximum, in your case, no more than 2 years. A year, only 2 summers, 2 New Years, 2 birthdays, at best." Only then did Mrs. Eleanor Vance realize how much she loved her life, it turned out. Even this one, childless, lonely. She became scared, truly scared. At first she had trouble falling asleep. She kept thinking about the approaching end. And so a year passed. The last months of Mrs. Eleanor Vance's stay on this earth began to flow. The woman got used to this thought. It no longer frightened her so much. Mrs. Eleanor Vance knew when things got really bad, she would go to a hospice under the care of doctors. They would take care of her there. She only wanted this moment to come as late as possible because Mrs. Eleanor Vance had plants. Who would take care of them? And in general, lately the woman particularly valued life. She admired the white clouds. The warm sun delighted her. Even in these grey, leaden clouds that now covered the sky, she saw a special beauty, restrained and cold. Mrs. Eleanor Vance caught her breath and walked on. The path led to the store. She deliberately chose the supermarket further from home. To get there, she had to walk through the park. The weather, of course, was not conducive to walks, and it was difficult for Mrs. Eleanor Vance to move. But without physical activity, the body might give up sooner. Doctors recommended daily walks, so she walked. Mrs. Eleanor Vance chose such a time, rush hour. People were walking around quickly, returning from work. Someone else had to stop by the store. Someone had to pick up a child from kindergarten. They seemed to live in a different time, hurrying, bustling. Mrs. Eleanor Vance could afford to walk at a leisurely pace and admire the scenery. And yet once, like all this young people, she also hurried, ran, rushed. And suddenly Mrs. Eleanor Vance's attention was drawn to a lone, hunched figure on a park bench. Sensing that the person was in trouble, she approached closer. A very young woman was sitting on the bench, dark-skinned, black-eyed. Her clothes were old, cheap. In her arms she held a bundle, the kind of babies discharged from the maternity hospital. She was rocking the bundle and crying. Yes, she was crying. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Nobody noticed these tears. People hurried past about their business. They didn't even pay attention to the girl on the bench, and if someone had glanced, they still wouldn't have seen the tears. The stranger with the baby sat half-turned, with her back to the main path of the park. Perhaps she didn't want to be seen in such a state. Mrs. Eleanor Vance understood that now she definitely couldn't leave. The girl looked just over 20, and a baby in her arms. She couldn't just leave her in trouble. The elderly woman hesitated for a long time before speaking to the stranger. It was awkward to bother her with questions. Who knows how the girl would perceive her attention? But Mrs. Eleanor Vance saw no other way for herself. "Hello," the elderly woman said, sitting down next to her. "Forgive my curiosity, but what has happened to you? Can I help in any way?" The girl turned her tear-stained face. Surprise was visible in her burning black eyes. She clearly didn't expect sympathy. "Thank you," the girl replied politely, "but I doubt you can help. My situation is hopeless." "That's not true. There's always a way out. I'm telling you this from the height of my years. There's no such thing as no way out." Mrs. Eleanor Vance smiled warmly. "It happens. I would tell you, but the story is very long and not very pleasant. You're probably in a hurry?" "Well, if there's one thing I have plenty of, it's free time," Mrs. Eleanor Vance objected, "and I just love all sorts of life stories." "And what time is it now?" The girl suddenly perked up. "Almost 6. Kindergarten is open until 7, so I still have an hour. If you have time, then listen." Anya was born in a Roma camp. She and her mother were treated with disdain. Anya was punished in different ways. She always got the worst of it. As she grew older, she understood her mother was an outsider. 70 years ago, a young girl, almost a child, ran away with her beloved to the camp. Anya's grandmother, her father's mother, adored her granddaughter no matter what. Anya was the only girl among the children of her grandmother's sons, long awaited. "Finally," the elderly woman said, "the one to whom I can pass on my gift was born." Grandmother Valia never hurt Anya. They often talked for a long time, walked together through the meadows and steppes where the camp stopped. Grandmother showed her granddaughter medicinal plants, told her about their power, and often held the girl's hand. During this time, Anya felt how the familiar warmth passed from grandmother to her. The Roma said that's how old Valia was passing on her gift to the girl, little by little, to the fact that the priceless gift was being received by an outsider. Yes, Anya was called an outsider in the camp, despite the fact that she had lived among these people since birth. Needless to say, the attitude towards the girl's mother was much colder. Anya remembered her mother as a silent and indifferent to everything beautiful woman. Her father, bringing her into the camp, quickly grew cold towards his beloved, and the pressure from the people also played a role. He had long since acquired a new wife who had borne him 3 sons. And Anya and her mother lived with grandmother Valia. Valia loved her granddaughter Anya and spent a lot of time with her. But Anya's mother she kept more as a servant, silent. At least the old woman didn't pity her daughter-in-law. Anya always, as long as she could remember, felt pity for her mother. Even as a small child she understood. Something had broken this beautiful young woman. Some external circumstances had made her a weak-willed, indifferent person. Mother. Even her own daughter didn't concern her. She dwelled in her own world, like an enchanted princess. She carried out Grandmother Valia's errands like a robot, mechanically. She spoke little, only when necessary, and never, never hugged Anya. And she wanted Mother's hugs so much, to see tenderness and love in her eyes, or at least interest. Grandmother Valia didn't love Mother, but this feeling wasn't the main one. Valia gave her shelter, food, clothing, and Grandmother tried to cure Mother, to bring her back to a full life. Anya saw this with her own eyes. Valia gave the young woman to drink herbal infusions, read incomprehensible spells. The girl hoped that it would work, but Mother remained the same, cold, detached, indifferent. "My strength isn't enough," Grandmother Valia would sometimes lament. "Sorrow sits deep in her soul, longing. No one ever loved her. That's terrible, you understand. It cripples the soul. That's why your mother couldn't bear it." "But I love her," Anya exclaimed. "That's what gives hope. Perhaps not all is lost. And also, Grandmother sees your gift. A little more, and when it fully passes to Anya, it will blossom with new strength. You will be stronger than me." The old woman smiled, stroking her granddaughter's hair. "They, all these Roma who don't accept you now, will fawn before you. They will beg you to save them or their children from ailments. Many things can be fixed with different skills using herbs and infusions. Only turn to the gift in truly serious cases. It's not a toy. When you grow up, you'll understand yourself. And then, one day, when Anya was 11, Mother suddenly fell ill. She was just as quiet, emotionless, absent as always. She lay down for a week, and in the morning she didn't get up. She lay quiet, pale, detached, and breathed heavily. Grandmother Valia became worried, took out her remedies and old books, and sent Anya outside. The girl sat near the wagon, leaning her back against the wall, and prayed that Grandmother would manage to pull Mother through. Only her inner feeling told her it wouldn't work. And so it happened. Anya sat outside for about 3 hours. Then Grandmother Valia came out. The girl understood everything from her sad face. Mother was no more. Anya took the loss hard. Yes, Mother never showed feelings, but even her presence gave her strength. And most importantly, hope lived in the girl's heart. Hope that someday everything would change. Mother would wake up from her stupor, the spell would break, she would smile at her daughter, hug her, and a different life would begin, happy, bright, warm. Grandmother Valia supported her granddaughter as much as she could, tried to understand what the child was experiencing. 2 years passed. One morning Valia sat Anya down in front of her, warning her about a serious talk. "I had a dream today," Grandmother began. "Not a simple dream. I understood that I would soon be gone." "No, Grandmother," Anya exclaimed. After Mother passed away, her most terrible fear became losing Grandmother, because then she would be completely alone. Her father had forgotten about her existence. He lived with his new family. The other Roma didn't accept her. Only Grandmother. Only she truly loved Anya. Let Grandmother stop saying such terrible words. "Anya, you must understand. That's how it must be. That's how it is. Give me your hand. I will pass the gift on to you completely. I don't need it any more." Anya obediently held out her palm. Valia squeezed it with a dry, thin hand, and the girl felt how the familiar warmth flowed from Grandmother to her. A pleasant feeling, but this time it was scary. Grandmother is never wrong, and she was telling the truth now. "How will I be without you?" "I know, dear. You are scared." Grandmother stroked her granddaughter's head. She looked at her with inexpressible sadness. It was clear that Grandmother also didn't want to leave the girl without support. Without her, Anya was very weak and vulnerable. Here you were, never accepted. "Listen carefully. When I am gone, leave the camp. Otherwise they will make a servant out of you, wear you out with physical labor. Your gift should serve good people. It is given to save people. So as soon as I am gone, go. At night. It's warm, nice, you'll easily get to the city, any city nearby. Ask people where the shelter, the orphanage is, and go there yourself. Ask as a child, they won't refuse. You'll be among strangers, but at least warm and fed. You'll grow up, become stronger." Anya looked closely at Grandmother, looked for signs of illness, but she looked as usual, cheerful, lively, quick. The girl began to think that Grandmother was mistaken, or that the terrible thing would not happen soon. But one morning, Grandmother didn't get up. Anya, already knowing what was wrong, slowly went up to the beloved person and made sure that Grandmother was no longer here, but somewhere very, very far away. Only her body remained here. The girl sobbed loudly. She cried for a long time, shuddering convulsively, but after that she felt better. Then Anya sat down on the floor near Grandmother's bed and thought, "Grandmother is gone. I need to leave. And better right now, before anyone found out and stopped her." Anya understood. They didn't love her here because she was an outsider. Some were hostile. Only Grandmother, who had great authority, restrained them. She helped the Roma get rid of toothaches, calmed migraines. Because of this, they tolerated the granddaughter. And now there was no protector. So it was time to use grandmother's advice, to run wherever her eyes led her. Anya knew the city was not far. Yesterday evening they drove past a sweet, cozy town. Anya admired its lights, the towers and tall buildings visible in the distance. Not a metropolis, but not a tiny town either. There was definitely a children's shelter there, and not just one, so Anya should go there. The girl quickly packed her few belongings into a backpack and, unnoticed by anyone, left the camp. She walked a long time on the country road among wide fields, trudging towards the city. The unknown was frightening and captivating. From the abundance of emotions, tears streamed down her cheeks. She didn't even wipe them away. Nobody sees anyway. To herself, Anya seemed tiny, insignificant, weak. But the girl knew. Somewhere inside sat a strong gift. It wouldn't let her perish. It would help. Finally, the girl reached the city, asked for directions to the orphanage, found the institution, opened the door, and asked to be taken to the director. A strict lady in glasses listened carefully to the story. It was a pre-prepared story in which there was a grain of truth. Anya told that she was born and raised in a camp. She didn't specify that she was only half Roma. Then her parents died. The Roma turned her into a servant. An adult widower threatened to take her as a wife. In short, Anya ran away from a hard life. She chose a different path. She didn't want to live in the camp. She dreamed of studying, getting a profession. It was difficult, but somehow Anya was registered. They made her documents. The girl took a long time to get used to the new life. Everything was different here. It was confusing. High beds instead of sleeping mats, clean linen, different clothes, different food, a strict daily routine, studying. Anya liked studying. She needed to catch up on a lot, so the girl dedicated. At first, here too they treated her like an outsider. Of course, her exotic appearance, her unusual story. But it wasn't contempt and alienation, as in the camp. Anya aroused interest. In the first months at the orphanage, she had to tell her story dozens of times. She even became a local celebrity. Then life settled into a routine. Anya finished 9th grade, studied to be a commodity expert, celebrated her coming of age, and graduated from the orphanage. She received a small apartment from the state as an orphan and got a job. Not in her profession, experience was needed there, and where would a recent college graduate get it? She stood behind the cash register at the supermarket. They paid well at least. In a word, Anya felt quite happy, and most importantly, normal, not a second-class person, as in the camp, a complete person. That past life the girl perceived as a fairy tale. Much seemed like invention, fantasy. For example, that very grandmother's gift, which she supposedly passed on to her granddaughter. Time passed, but the superpower didn't manifest. So Anya decided that it was all imagined. There was no such thing, that's all. One day the supermarket started renovations, and employees who couldn't serve customers had to monitor the workers in shifts. In one of the shifts, Anya met a nice guy, tall, lean, athletic, light brown hair, light blue eyes, a beautiful gaze, an open smile. The guy immediately showed sympathy for the cashier. He winked at her cheerfully. The girl smiled back, showing that she wasn't against meeting. People had approached her before to meet. Anya had an interesting and bright appearance. She knew about it. But things didn't go beyond a couple of dates. The suitors disappointed her. But with Andrew, everything turned out differently. From the first glance, a strong and very warm feeling began to arise. Anya immediately understood. They didn't date for long. After several dates, they decided to live together in Anya's apartment. Andrew was not local. He was born in a village from a large family. Well, he worked on a construction site. He worked hard. He dreamed of a house, not an apartment. And for now, he was living in rented accommodation. Andrew immediately took on all the men's work around the house. He glued the wallpaper, fixed the skewed curtain rod, repaired the wardrobe. And it also turned out that he cooked wonderfully. It seemed there was nothing that Andrew couldn't do. Life was like that. He had to learn everything. They were good together, warm, cozy. They understood each other with half a word. Sometimes words weren't even needed. Finally, Anya felt happy and loved. She hadn't even dreamed of such a relationship. Andrew and Anya got married. Soon the young wife realized that she was pregnant. The joy of the future parents knew no bounds. They weren't afraid that duties would increase. Everything was great. They had a roof over their heads. They didn't complain about their income, as Andrew earned well. A son, Arthur, was born, the firstborn. Andrew chose the name. That was his grandfather's name, a kind and hard-working man. A daughter, Catherine, was born a year and a half later. Anya named her after her mother. The hustle and bustle of caring for the little ones, household chores, all this delighted and captivated Anya. She enjoyed the role of wife and mother. Yes, sometimes it was difficult, but it was all for the sake of loved ones, for the sake of her husband, the reliable, caring Andrew, for the sake of Artie and Kathy, so sweet and funny. The little ones started kindergarten. It became a little easier. Anya started getting ready for work, decided to leave the second maternity leave earlier. The couple had ambitious plans. Both dreamed of expanding, of turning a one-room apartment into a 2- or 3-room one. And then they could think about a house, more space, and it was already getting cramped for such a large family in one room. And then Anya realized that she was expecting another child. This time she was scared. They hadn't planned to become a large family so soon, and it wasn't the time now. Andrew supported her, reassured her, assured her that everything would be fine. "I will work more, that's all. There are plenty of opportunities to earn extra money on the construction site." Trouble happened when Anya was already living her last month before the birth of her youngest daughter. There was very little time left. That morning she didn't want to let her husband go to work. A vague premonition of trouble tormented her. Anya chased away bad thoughts, explained everything by her condition. After all, it was time. 2 hours later, Anya was called to report the terrible news. Andrew was crushed at the construction site by a concrete block. Of course, they didn't save him. Anya sobbed, howled like a wounded animal. Fortunately, the children were at kindergarten. She could give vent to her feelings. The woman cursed fate, which had once again treated her so cruelly, called Andrew back. And then suddenly she felt his presence. It was inexplicable. She just understood that Andrew was here. He saw her, wanted to comfort her, but couldn't, and it hurt him. Anya pulled herself together, said aloud that she loved Andrew very much, realizing that she would no longer have the opportunity to be heard by him. And also that she perfectly understood. She now needed to be strong, brave, for the sake of their children. "You can be calm about us. I'll manage." And Anya tried. She tried very hard to be strong, although sometimes it was unbearable. Because of stress, labour started prematurely. The children had to be left with neighbours. Where else could she put them? It was initially planned that Andrew would take leave for the time she was in the maternity hospital, but fate twisted everything. The girl was born small but strong and viable. Anya named her Eve. That's what Andrew wanted. And the young woman was left with 3 small children in her arms, without any support. Anya applied for all possible benefits, but there wasn't enough money. The children grew quickly, new clothes and shoes were constantly needed, and also, they often got sick. She had to leave fabulous sums at pharmacies. What could she do? Health first and foremost. This is where Anya's gift would have been useful, if only she could rid the little ones of endless colds and sore throats. But the gift was dormant, or maybe it wasn't there at all, no gift at all. There wasn't enough money, and Anya took a step which later seemed a fatal mistake. She took out a loan. The money, so necessary for the family, was in her hands instantly. Anya bought groceries, medicine, updated the children's wardrobe, but the amount had to be repaid with high interest. At first, Anya regularly paid off the debt. Then the children got sick again. She had to pay a fortune for treatment, and Anya missed a payment. As a result, they put her on the meter. The debt began to grow at a frantic pace. This was a common scheme. Anya wasn't the only one who fell for this trick. In short, collectors started bothering her. Anya couldn't go back to work. Little Eve was too small. You couldn't even leave her for a couple of hours to wash the entrance. In short, Anya lost her apartment. It was taken for debts, after all. The loan was secured by real estate. Anya grabbed her head. Where to go with 3 little ones? What had she done? Neighbours advised her to register at a special shelter. You could live there for about 3 months. They give you time to find a job, to settle down. But what could Anya do? Who would hire a woman with 3 children in her arms, one of whom was a baby? And how to work if you couldn't leave Eve with anyone, and the older ones kept getting sick and couldn't attend kindergarten? Well, that's my whole story. In a week, of course, I couldn't find either a job or an apartment. How? I have little Eve. Where would she go? And what now? Gasped the former teacher. Anya's story was incredible. At times it resembled a fairy tale. But this wasn't a movie. This was real life, and the young woman with 3 little ones truly had nowhere to go. How terrible! They'll be taken to an orphanage. They'll grow up like me in state walls, only with a living mother who is so worthless that she can't provide normal conditions. Saying so, Anya started crying again, quietly, unnoticed. But Mrs. Eleanor Vance saw everything and perfectly understood in what desperate situation the young woman was. "Here's what," the old woman said decisively. "Move in with me." It was a strange, risky offer, to invite an unfamiliar family home. Mrs. Eleanor Vance knew that neighbours and acquaintances would judge her, but she didn't care. Anya and her children needed help. If she didn't reach out to her now, the little ones would go to an orphanage, and their mother straight onto the street. 4 broken fates. Mrs. Eleanor Vance had nothing. She was living out her life. And Mrs. Eleanor Vance would do it, even at risk to herself. What's the point? Anya couldn't believe her ears at first. "And your relatives? Will they be against it?" "No, I have no one." Mrs. Eleanor Vance placed her hand on Anya's shoulder. "Let's go to the kindergarten for your little ones. Then we'll go to the store. We need to buy something for dinner. After all, I have guests now." Mrs. Eleanor Vance was increasingly happy each day about the chance meeting with the young woman in the park. Anya turned out to be a very pleasant and kind person, hard-working, grateful, sensitive, and her children. Mrs. Eleanor Vance's heart melted with tenderness when she watched them. Serious, thoughtful Arthur, chatterbox Kathy, plump, bright little Eve. Mrs. Eleanor Vance baked them pancakes and pies, feeling like a grandmother. This feeling was so pleasant, words couldn't describe it. Mrs. Eleanor Vance and Anya often had heartfelt conversations. They both needed this warmth, care, attention, the absence of the feeling of total loneliness and uselessness. Completely strangers in just a few weeks. So she had to tell Anya about her diagnosis. If only I had that gift, she shook her head bitterly. Time passed. Mrs. Eleanor Vance's condition worsened. This was natural. Doctors had warned immediately. That's how it happens. It was time to move to the hospice under the care of medical professionals. Anya saw Mrs. Eleanor Vance off with tears, all in the ambulance. Although the elderly woman tried to dissuade her from this troublesome step, after all, she had to go back home with tiny little Eve in her arms. Mrs. Eleanor Vance took care of Anya in advance. She signed the apartment over to her. Neighbours gossiped. She'll bump you off instead of taking the apartment for herself. She'll poison you or come up with something else. But Mrs. Eleanor Vance was sure about Anya. You couldn't fake that. The elderly woman was good at reading people. Anya was truly attached to her and was very afraid of losing her. Anya herself had said this many times and even cried. "What's going on? Why do all my loved ones leave? Why am I always left alone?" Anya, upon learning of the terrible diagnosis, broke down and sobbed, quite sincerely. Mrs. Eleanor Vance comforted her, promised that everything would be fine. Anya later apologized for her weakness. It was quiet, peaceful and cozy in the hospice. Kind doctors, high doses of medication relieving pain and seizures. Mrs. Eleanor Vance spent time half asleep. Her head felt clear, her soul was calm. Anya visited her often, placed her palm on her forehead, looked intently into her eyes. After Anya left, Mrs. Eleanor Vance felt better, more cheerful. She gained strength. Perhaps from the feeling that someone needed her, someone worried about her, cared for her. Several weeks passed. To her surprise, Mrs. Eleanor Vance felt better. She gained strength for walks in the hospital garden. Again she admired the flowers, the blue sky, enjoying this farewell gift of fate to the fullest. Another such improvement in condition might not happen. Strangely enough, the tests also improved. Doctors were surprised but said that this sometimes happens, a calm before the decisive blow. Mrs. Eleanor Vance suddenly really wanted to visit home one more time, to see Anya and the little ones, to breathe in the familiar scent of the apartment, to take something as a keepsake. The locket, the one Kathy gave her many years ago, a keepsake with a story. It would be good to have it with her here, in the hospice, as a reminder of home, of her past life. Mrs. Eleanor Vance asked the doctor for permission. He gave permission for the trip. Mrs. Eleanor Vance called a taxi and went. It was so amazing. She hadn't even thought that she would ever leave the hospice walls alive. It wasn't a recovery, of course, not a deliverance from illness, but not feeling pain, being able to go wherever her heart desired. She felt strength in her legs and arms, a pleasant lightness in her whole body. Mrs. Eleanor Vance opened the door with her key. The apartment was quiet and empty. It was all clear. Anya and Eve were out for a walk. The little ones were at kindergarten. Mrs. Eleanor Vance walked through the familiar rooms, touched beloved things, the rocking chair, the plush bear once won at a shooting range, the soft blanket. Here was the nightstand with the drawer where the jewellery lay. Mrs. Eleanor Vance wasn't interested in expensive chains and rings. She came for that very locket. The elderly woman found the desired item, opened the locket, and admired Kathy's cheerful face. "Where is she now?" A sound was heard. Mrs. Eleanor Vance hurried to meet it. "You're home!" Anya gasped. She sat little Eve down and went up to Mrs. Eleanor Vance. Joy and surprise were visible in Anya's eyes. "Yes, I felt better. They let me come home for a bit." "Felt better?" Anya smiled. "Really? Did it really work?" "What worked?" Mrs. Eleanor Vance didn't understand. It's all my gift, you understand? I was worried about you. I didn't want to lose another loved one. I already have many losses. While the children didn't see, I even cried. And one day I had a dream. My grandmother, Valia, the Roma woman, she strictly reprimanded me that I should stop crying, that now was the time to show the gift. Yes, grandmother said that it would be difficult, and it cost her a great effort, and it would all be in vain if I didn't pull you through. And I did it. I awakened the power within me. I think grandmother also helped. Mrs. Eleanor Vance blinked in confusion. Well, could it be true? And then she remembered how much better she felt after Anya's visits, how hot her hands were. Not just hot. Mrs. Eleanor Vance thought even then that it seemed because of the illness. What do the doctors say? Anya herself didn't seem to fully believe in this miracle. Well, they said that the tests had improved, but it could be the calm before the storm. There will be no storm. Anya smiled broadly and then hugged Mrs. Eleanor Vance tightly. The storm is cancelled. My gift has awakened. It has awakened so I could save you. You understand? You don't believe it? You'll see. Everything will be all right. Now Anya, overwhelmed with emotion, threw up her hands. Her coal-black eyes shone with joy. Little Eve didn't understand anything, but she realized something good was happening, and she also smiled, like her mother. Oh, what's that in your hands? Anya finally noticed the locket. What an interesting thing. I feel it has a special energy, warm, good. This is a gift from one of my students. A former one, of course. It was a long time ago. Mrs. Eleanor Vance still couldn't process what Anya had said. What does this mean? The imminent end is cancelled. She'll live a little longer. And now she wanted to live, especially. And there were the little ones who loved her so much and needed her. She wanted to see them grow, mature. She wanted to support them on their difficult path. Life isn't easy. People need help, support, understanding, love. Anya, meanwhile, turned the locket in her hands. It had somehow really caught her attention. Finally, she pried open the lid with her fingernail. A surprised gasp was heard. Anya covered her mouth with her hand. "It's my mother," the woman finally said, pointing at Kathy's photo. "She's younger here, but it's definitely her. I recognized her." "It can't be." Mrs. Eleanor Vance hadn't recovered from one shock, and here was another. "It just doesn't happen like that." "It does happen, it turns out. It's definitely Mother. Her eyes, lips, nose. I remember her face in the smallest details." "What was your mother's name?" "Kathy. I named my oldest daughter after her." "Of course. How did I not guess right away? And my student was also named Kathy. She disappeared as a teenager. I didn't help her. I didn't understand in time. She ran away to a camp with a Roma man and then gave birth to you. Incredible. I couldn't help Kathy, but I helped her daughter. And you in turn saved me." All this still needed to be processed. But at that very moment, Mrs. Eleanor Vance somehow became completely convinced that the illness had retreated and that she now had life.